There is an ancient principle in warfare. A weak adversary with an unpredictable weapon is more dangerous than a strong enemy with known capabilities. For 73 years, since the 1953 armistice, the United States treated North Korea as a manageable nuisance. But this week, two names changed everything: Kim Jong-un and General Paul LaCamera. And two numbers are rewriting the Pentagon's calculations: 11,860 kilometers of range and 15 minutes of warning time. What the corporate media doesn't want you to know is that on December 18th, 2024, North Korea launched its solid-fuel Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile, and for the first time in history, U.S. early warning systems in Japan and South Korea took 47 seconds to identify the launch. 47 seconds. In nuclear warfare, that's an eternity. And I'm not saying this. The commander of U.S. Forces Korea himself says this in a classified cable leaked through South Korean intelligence sources. I worked at the IMF for years, and I've seen this pattern before. When an empire underestimates an adversary for decades, the day that adversary demonstrates real capability, the entire geopolitical board reorganizes within hours. And this week, while Beijing and Moscow watch with calculated satisfaction, Washington is facing a truth it has denied for 30 years. North Korea is no longer a pariah state that can be ignored. It is a fully capable nuclear power, with very powerful friends. The transition has already happened. The world just hasn't realized it yet. Let me take you through exactly how Washington created this monster, because what's happening now is the direct consequence of 3 decades of failed policies, useless sanctions, and imperial arrogance. In 1994, the United States and North Korea signed the agreed framework. Pyongyang agreed to freeze its nuclear program in exchange for 2 light water reactors and 500,000 tons of oil annually. How much did the United States deliver? The first reactor began construction in 2002, 8 years late. The second never started. Oil shipments were inconsistent, arriving only 64% of what was promised between 1995 and 2002. And during those same years, do you know how much the United States spent on military operations on the Korean Peninsula? $127 billion, maintaining 28,500 troops, conducting annual military exercises that simulated invasion and decapitation of North Korean leadership. The message was clear: we don't respect agreements, but we expect you to follow them. In 2002, the Bush administration declared North Korea part of the axis of evil, along with Iraq and Iran. Months later, they invaded Iraq, overthrew Saddam Hussein, and executed him. The lesson for Pyongyang? If you give up your nuclear weapons, you end up like Gaddafi in Libya, murdered in a ditch after the United States convinces you to disarm. Libya is the perfect case. In 2003, Muammar Gaddafi agreed to dismantle his nuclear program in exchange for normalization of relations. The United States and NATO celebrated. In 2011, 8 years later, they bombed Libya for 7 months. 26,500 airstrikes. Gaddafi was killed. The country collapsed into civil war that continues today. North Korea was watching. The conclusion was obvious: U.S. guarantees aren't worth the paper they're written on. The only real guarantee is having nuclear weapons that work and the capability to deliver them to U.S. territory. So Pyongyang doubled down. Between 2006 and 2017, it conducted 6 nuclear tests. The United States responded with sanctions. More sanctions. Even more sanctions. The total value of economic sanctions imposed on North Korea since 2006, estimated at $89 billion in blocked trade, denied access to financial markets, and frozen assets. The result? North Korea developed intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach any city in the continental United States. They developed miniaturized nuclear warheads. They developed solid fuel systems that can be launched in minutes instead of hours. And they did it while under the most severe sanctions on the planet. During this time, how much did the United States invest in missile defense on the Korean Peninsula? $34 billion in the THAAD system since 2016. Advanced Patriot systems, $12 billion additional. Aegis naval systems, $18 billion more. Total, $64 billion in defensive systems. And on December 18th, 2024, All those systems took 47 seconds to detect a launch that should have been identified in 8 to 10 seconds according to Pentagon operational standards. Why? Because the Hwasong 18 uses solid fuel, which means there's no detectable preparation period. It launches from a mobile vehicle, and it uses decoy technology that confuses radars. And here's the part that should terrify every military planner in Washington. According to trajectory analysis conducted by Japanese experts at the National Security Research Institute, this missile reached an altitude of 6,518 kilometers and flew 1,002 kilometers before falling into the Sea of Japan. If it had been launched on a standard trajectory instead of a lofted test trajectory, its range would have been 11,860 kilometers. That covers the entire U.S. West Coast, Chicago, and possibly New York. So what happened? General Paul LaCamera, commander of U.S. Forces Korea, convened an emergency meeting with South Korean and Japanese officials on December 19th. According to leaked sources, he said the following: "We need to reevaluate our detection protocols. 47 seconds is unacceptable. In a real combat scenario, that could mean hundreds of thousands of lives." And here's where it gets truly interesting. Because North Korea didn't develop this technology in a vacuum. China provided them with critical components for inertial guidance systems. Russia shared rocket propulsion technology after Kim Jong-un's visit to Vladivostok in September 2023, where he met personally with Putin for 5 hours. Why? Because Beijing and Moscow have discovered something brilliant. They don't need to directly confront the United States when they can arm a nuclear proxy that keeps 82,000 US and Japanese troops tied down in Northeast Asia, focused on the Korean Peninsula instead of on Taiwan or Ukraine. The cost to China of providing technology to North Korea? Virtually zero. The strategic value? Incalculable. Every dollar the United States spends defending against North Korean missiles is a dollar not spent containing China in the Pacific. For 78 years, the United States had a magic trick on the Korean Peninsula. It was called overwhelming technological superiority. The assumption was simple. Even if North Korea developed nuclear weapons, they would never develop delivery systems sophisticated enough to truly threaten U.S. territory. And if they tried, U.S. defensive systems would shoot them down. That assumption just got destroyed. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin requested $17 billion in emergency funding on December 21st to accelerate deployment of advanced missile defense systems in the region. Congress's response? Silence. Because they're trying to finance 2 proxy wars in Ukraine and Gaza, modernize the nuclear arsenal, repair collapsing infrastructure, and deal with a $34 trillion national debt. There's no money. The empire is literally out of funds. And it gets better. Japan announced on December 20th that it's considering developing preemptive strike capabilities for the first time since 1945. Do you know what that means? It means the United States' most important ally in Asia is losing faith in America's ability to protect them. They're contemplating rearming with offensive weapons because they no longer trust the U.S. nuclear umbrella. South Korea is having the same conversation. President Yoon Suk Yeol faces massive internal pressure to develop South Korea's own nuclear weapons after this launch. Polls show 76% of South Koreans now support a national nuclear program. If South Korea and Japan go nuclear, the entire non-proliferation regime that the United States built over 60 years collapses. Taiwan will consider nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia will accelerate its program. Turkey, Egypt, Thailand. Every country facing regional threats will conclude that U.S. security guarantees are worthless paper. And it all traces back to this moment. This missile launch. These 47 seconds of detection delay. You can't declare war on your own banker, and you can't simultaneously contain Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea when your banker is arming your adversaries. Now I want to mention John Mearsheimer here, professor of political science at the University of Chicago. Mearsheimer has written extensively about what he calls security dilemmas in international relations. His central argument: when a state feels existentially threatened, it will take any action necessary to guarantee its survival, regardless of international norms or sanctions. North Korea is the perfect case study. They faced existential threat from the United States for 70 years. They responded by developing the only deterrent that guarantees survival: nuclear weapons, and the capability to deliver them. And no amount of sanctions, pressure, or military threats was going to stop them. Mearsheimer also predicted in 2014 that the United States' attempt to maintain global hegemony simultaneously in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia would eventually create what he called balancing coalitions, where adversaries cooperate to counter the dominant power even if they have conflicting interests among themselves. Look at what's happening now. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are not natural allies. They have different histories, different systems, sometimes conflicting interests, but they're all cooperating to counter U.S. pressure. Russia provides energy to China. China provides technology to North Korea. Iran provides drones to Russia. North Korea provides ammunition to Russia. It's a perfect balancing coalition. And it's working. Kenneth Waltz, another giant of international relations theory, argued that nuclear proliferation actually makes the world more stable, not less. His logic: when both sides have nuclear weapons, both sides are extremely cautious, which reduces the likelihood of conventional war. North Korea just proved his theory. Now that they have credible nuclear capability that can reach the United States, what's the likelihood that the United States will attempt a preemptive military strike against them? Zero. Absolutely zero. Because the risk of a nuclear counterstrike on Los Angeles or Seattle is unacceptable. For decades, the United States threatened all options on the table with North Korea. Those options just got eliminated. Now the only options are diplomacy or coexistence. And given that Washington wasted 30 years of diplomatic opportunities, all that's left is uncomfortable coexistence with a nuclear enemy. And now we're witnessing the collapse of the entire system the United States built after 1945, because that system depended on two pillars. First pillar: monopoly or near monopoly on nuclear weapons among great powers. Second pillar: U.S. ability to guarantee security to allies, preventing their need to develop their own capabilities. Both pillars are crumbling simultaneously. The nuclear monopoly ended when China tested its first weapon in 1964, but the United States maintained crushing qualitative superiority for decades. That superiority is evaporating. China has hypersonic missiles that the United States cannot intercept. Russia has nuclear torpedoes that can destroy entire coastal cities. And now North Korea has solid fuel missiles that can launch before U.S. systems even complete their detection sequence. The second pillar, security guarantees, is collapsing because allies like Japan and South Korea are watching what happened in Ukraine. The United States promised Ukraine protection if they gave up their nuclear weapons in 1994. Ukraine complied. In 2022, Russia invaded. The United States sent weapons, but not a single soldier. Kyiv is fighting alone. The lesson is brutal and clear. U.S. security guarantees are conditional. If you face a real threat, you might get weapons, but not direct protection. So why would you trust your national survival to U.S. promises when you could develop your own capabilities? This is the Pentagon's nightmare made real. A world where half a dozen more countries decide they need nuclear weapons because they can't trust the United States. A world where every regional crisis contains the potential for nuclear escalation. A world where the non-proliferation regime that took 60 years to build unravels in less than a decade. And North Korea just accelerated that process with this single missile launch. Trade between China and North Korea reached $10.6 billion in 2023 despite sanctions. China provides 90% of North Korea's oil. In 2024, that trade is projected at $12.8 billion. The sanctions are paper, completely ineffective when your main adversary ignores them. Russia just vetoed a UN resolution that would have extended sanctions monitoring against North Korea. First time they've done that. The message: the sanctions regime is over. Moscow and Beijing are no longer going to cooperate with U.S. pressure. And here's the nuclear irony. The United States needs Chinese and Russian cooperation on dozens of global issues. Climate change, counterproliferation, financial stability. But you can't get cooperation from countries you're actively trying to contain, isolate, and weaken. Are you enjoying the analysis so far? If so, hit the subscribe button below. This channel is committed to revealing the geopolitical truths that corporate media deliberately buries. Join thousands who are waking up to the realities that are reshaping the global order. And if this analysis is opening your eyes, hit the like button It helps the algorithm show this to more people who need to see this information. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching this from? We're building a global community of people committed to understanding the truth behind the headlines. Because what comes next affects you directly. You, your security, your future. Every dollar the United States spends responding to North Korean threats is a dollar not spent on you. Not on infrastructure, not on healthcare, not on education. The 2024 defense budget is $886 billion. Missile defenses in Asia, $64 billion just in the last 8 years. And those systems just demonstrated they have a 47-second detection delay. Imagine how many bridges could be repaired with $64 billion. How many schools renovated? How much student debt forgiven? But that money went to systems that don't work against an adversary the United States created with 30 years of failed sanctions. And while the Pentagon requests another $17 billion to defend against North Korea, China is watching and taking notes. Every defensive system the United States deploys in Korea is a system they study, analyze, and develop countermeasures for. And when they finally move on Taiwan, if they move, they'll know exactly how to defeat every U.S. defensive capability because they've been watching for years. North Korea isn't the real problem. It's the symptom. The real problem is that the United States built a global order based on crushing military dominance. And that order is collapsing because they can no longer afford to maintain it while China, Russia, and Iran build alternatives. The world is reorganizing into regional blocs. China dominating Asia, Russia dominating the post-Soviet space, the United States retreating, and middle powers like North Korea, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, all navigating between these blocs, playing them against each other, acquiring autonomy that was impossible in the unipolar world of the 90s and 2000s. Your cost of living is connected to this. Every time there's geopolitical instability, energy prices rise. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, oil hit $120 a barrel. Gas prices hit national averages of $5 per gallon in the United States. That's direct geopolitical tax on your wallet. Now imagine a scenario where tension on the Korean peninsula escalates. Japan and South Korea consider nuclear options. China responds with massive military maneuvers. The Korea Strait becomes a potential conflict zone. Maritime trade is disrupted. 30% of all global maritime trade passes through waters around Korea and Japan. Disrupt that, and prices for everything increase. Electronics, automobiles, manufactured goods, everything. And it's not just trade, it's supply chains. If South Korea is forced to divert resources toward defense because it no longer trusts U.S. protection, its semiconductor production slows down. Those semiconductors are in your phone, your car, your computer, your appliances. Prices rise. Availability decreases. This is the interconnected reality of hegemonic collapse. It's not abstract. It's not just great powers moving pieces on a board. It's your daily life becoming more expensive, less predictable, more precarious. But there's hope in this chaos. A multipolar world means no single power can bully everyone else. It means smaller countries have options, can play great powers against each other, can negotiate better terms. For decades, the United States dictated terms. Either you accepted the US-led order or you faced sanctions, isolation, possible military intervention. That system is ending. And while the transition is painful, what emerges could be more balanced. The BRICS are building alternative financial institutions. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has 109 member countries, including traditional U.S. allies like the UK, France, Germany. The New Development Bank is lending for infrastructure in local currencies, bypassing the dollar. This isn't anti-American. It's post-American. It's a world recognizing that you don't need Washington's permission to trade, build, develop. And for ordinary citizens in America, Europe, everywhere, this means adjustment. It means living standards can't continue to be subsidized by monetary hegemony. It means prices will reflect real costs, not costs artificially suppressed by dollar dominance. It will be difficult, but it could also be more sustainable. A system where success comes from producing value, not from controlling money and military. Stay alert. Stay informed. Because what you witnessed this week, this North Korean missile launch, these 47 seconds of delay, this implicit admission of vulnerability, is not an isolated event. It's a marker, a moment where the balance of power became visible to anyone paying attention. The United States remains formidable. It still has the most powerful military, the largest economy, the most extensive influence. But it's no longer uncontestable. It's no longer invulnerable. And adversaries in Pyongyang, Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, they all know it now. The unipolar era has ended. The multipolar era has begun. And you're witnessing exactly what that transition looks like. Not with dramatic explosions, but with missile launches that reveal vulnerabilities. With 47-second delays that expose weaknesses. With allies questioning guarantees. With adversaries cooperating where they once competed. The transition has already happened. The world just hasn't realized it yet.